Hi, everybody. John McLaughlin, the current chair of the Iowa Firearms Coalition. Another Warrior Wednesday, and we're bringing you one of our own warriors from the IFC, and that is Richard Rogers. Richard is someone I've known for a while. I remember him coming over to my hangar in Ankeny at the airport and talking a little bit, and we eventually did some training together out in the desert of Nevada, and now we are working together on IFC. So, Richard, just tell the folks maybe that aren't involved in IFC already who you are. Give us a little bit of your background.
Well, John, I grew up on a farm in northern Marshall County, oldest of 5 kids. And of course, we had guns around, but it was a 22 rifle. So I had a single shot, was my first gun, and 16 gauge or 12 gauge, dad's 12 gauge, did a lot of rabbit and squirrel and pigeon hunting with the BB guns as a kid, and just started getting into pheasant hunting when I moved to town. And it was when I moved to town that I got involved in politics at a very young age, and I basically have been ever since. The other thing that I started at a young age was I started to fly. You mentioned that's how we met out at the airport. I started to fly in junior high, got my private license while I was in high school, and I spent my career as a professional pilot, a corporate pilot, chief pilot. But I always maintained an interest in politics, and I was very heavily into politics as a youth until I got married at the age of 22. I've been married almost 50 years. Next spring, it'll be 50 years. But I always was involved. I was very heavily involved in politics until that point. And then I got married and had to really work for a living, start real jobs. But I always maintained that interest. And in recent decades, I got more involved again in Iowa politics. And in the process of doing that, or in that same time frame, back in late 2007, I heard a couple of guys on WHO Talk Radio talking about a group called Iowa Carry. And it was a very interesting show. I kind of came in the middle of it. And I happened to meet one of those guys, one of our early members and founders, Roger Burdett. I happened to meet him in November, December, as I was working in a political campaign. And got to know him just a little bit. So in January, after the Iowa caucuses were over and my political efforts were pretty much behind me in that campaign, I looked him up, and I looked up John Reed, who later became chairman of IFC. And I found out that, I want to know what these people were about. And I decided that they really had the opportunity to accomplish something. They had the possibility of accomplishing something. And so I joined as a life member of Iowa Carry back in January or February of 2008, and I've been in it up to my eyeballs ever since. I don't know that I actually intended that, but it really was fairly short order that we got shall issue. Iowa Carry was created just to change the law, the very inequitable law that Iowa had on issuing weapons permits, where the sheriffs had absolute discretion. They could deny you a permit and give one to your neighbor. They could say, I don't like guys with blue eyes and I'm not giving you a permit, or they could issue permits and then wake up the next morning and say this is too much hassle and cancel them all and never issue another one. There was no appeal to that. And that's why Iowa Carry was formed is to address that. And fortunately, by 2010, it took a lot of work, and we got a lot of volunteers around the state excited about it. But by 2010, we changed that law, which went into effect in January 1st, 2011. And we really changed the landscape on firearms law here in Iowa, and that was the start of it.
So IFC bills themselves as Iowa's only effective organization related to maintaining our rights. And some others try to glom on and take credit, but IFC, as I've observed since I've been on the board now since I guess 2017, you guys are volunteers, but the amount of time, effort, just the love for the Second Amendment that is put in here, I don't think most folks have any concept of what's going on behind the scenes. So just give us a little bit of a kind of a pull back the curtain a little bit and give the average Iowan a view of what's been going on behind the scenes to protect this right for everyone.
Well, first let me say that it is a right. And, I've got a picture of a gun behind me, but you also see the flag.
Yep.
And we the people.
Right.
I am not a gun guy per se, although I've had a permit to carry in Polk County since I turned 21. As you can see, that's been quite a long time ago. But to me, it's a matter of liberty. And the Second Amendment, to me, it's the canary in the mine for our other rights. It's also the final guarantor of our other rights. The last ditch means to defend our other rights.
Yep.
But it's the canary in the mine. And for so long, it was the one that was so easily kicked under the carpet and abused and ignored. And that's why I fought this. When I got involved with Iowa Carry, well, actually back in the late 80s, early 90s, I remember going to a meeting of another group here in Iowa and asking, why didn't we fight to change this May issue weapons permit law? And then basically I was told, well, it's not so bad the way it is, and some counties are okay. And maybe we'll get something worse. And I thought that was a very defeatist attitude. Right. And it turns out it was against the tide of history, because just before that, Florida had changed the shell issue, and they started this movement across the country that has swept across it in 30 years. And now we have constitutional carry. There's a tidal wave of constitutional carry, permitless carry, right, which is the second wave of this. So I do it for the liberty aspects, and that's really the reason. But when we got shall issue law passed in 2010, we had to decide. That's what Iowa Carry was for. We've accomplished our mission. Should we dry up and blow away, or do we become a permanent organization rather than an ad hoc organization, right, and broaden our goals? And that's what we did. And then we got to looking at the code of Iowa, and we discovered there's a whole lot of other things we weren't very happy with. And we have worked to change that over the years, as well as to repel those who wanted to regress back to the bad laws that we had before, or worse. Right. One thing I guess we'll probably get into later is our big move over the next year, as you know, is to advocate for the Freedom Amendment, which will add strong protections of the right to keep and bear arms to the Iowa Constitution for the first time. We're one of only 6 states that doesn't have any protection for the right to keep and bear arms in our state constitution. It's a club you don't want to be in. I think it's California, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Minnesota, and Iowa. What doesn't fit there? Yeah, exactly. But without a change to the Constitution, we can talk more about this later. A single session of the legislature, if it was in the wrong hands and with the wrong governor, could reverse everything we've done and even go further in the opposite direction. I think that's important. We've worked over the years to try to change this, and maybe we can get into that. There's been an awful lot that we've gotten accomplished. Yeah, if you want to know some of those accomplishments, just go to the IFC websites and look at some of these accomplishments. I think most people will be shocked to see how many things have been shot down thanks to the work of IFC that most folks were probably unaware of. And if they hadn't have been shot down, we'd be in a much different place than we're in right now. Yeah, ifc.org is our website. And for those who haven't been there for a long time, for the last year or so, we've had a really good updated website. It used to be pretty dated and stale, but there's a lot of good content there, and including our accomplishments. And when I say our accomplishments, it's the accomplishment of our volunteers across the state, those who are maybe not members, we wish they would be, right, but who follow us and who help us to persuade our senators and legislators, sometimes bureaucrats, the governor, to make necessary changes and to protect these rights. And so it's a big team overall that's accomplished this. Obviously you and I, we can't change the law directly. Right. It's the senators and representatives who have been persuaded, and some of them need to be persuaded because they weren't that knowledgeable on these issues. Right. And that's one of the big things we do. Our IFC and Iowa Carry before that is big on education. We educate the public on these issues, and on the law, we educate news media, used to be in the media. We educate legislators, other government officials, and sometimes we have lawyers call us up and want to know kind of a shortcut to, well, what do you think about how does this law really work? So we're all about education. In the firearms world, we have a saying, you don't know what you don't know. Right. And that's really where you've been the warrior, and getting in there and working with these legislators and
explaining the way things are and opening their eyes to something that, you know, they really have no knowledge of. You know, we might assume everybody thinks like us, but we're definitely in the minority as far as, you know, knowledge of guns and self-defense and things like that. So that love you have for liberty and your warrior spirit, going to these people and saying, hey, you know, we're here as a friend, we're trying to educate you, we're not adversarial, and changing, you know, hearts and minds, as they say, you know, one person at a time.
We can be a little adversarial at times, but it's all in the spirit of trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
You know, we don't take this fire and brimstone attitude. We work with these folks. We try to educate them, as I say, bring them along, and it's worked out very well. On the issue, you know, you talked about some other folks that take a different attitude, and I don't want to get into that too much, but it was suggested at the time that we went from may issue to shall issue, that we should just go straight to not requiring a permit. Well, that was never going to happen, and it never was going to happen until this year. This is the first real opportunity we had to do it, and we got it done. But at the time, that was considered a radical idea, even though it was a return to the way things were in the beginning of the country, in the beginning of the state, but it was now considered a radical idea.
Mm-hmm.
So we needed to have this process unroll over time, and it's been a fairly short period of time,
right,
that we've gotten all these changes made, but it had to happen that way. I used to use the analogy that it's as if you were in one room that was may issue, where the sheriffs had all the power and there was no appeal and so on, and you wanted to go open the door and go into this other room where there were no restrictions on carrying a gun, and you couldn't do that. You have to go through an antechamber in between, which was
right,
shall issue.
yep,
We had, for a number of years, when we were first starting this fight, we had less than 30,000 people across the entire state that had issued permits to carry weapons, had been issued permits to carry weapons. And now it's up around 425,000. I don't remember exactly, but it's well over 400,000. It has been for some time. That's a seismic change.
yeah. And a lot of people, I don't think they fully realize there's still value in having that little plastic card,
Oh, yeah.
even though Iowa's constitutional carry now. Why don't you get into that a little bit?
Okay, well, there's 4 reasons, John, why you really ought to have a permit to carry in Iowa, even though it's not required. And Iowa law really doesn't recognize any difference between a person who has a permit to carry a weapon and one who doesn't. By the way, in Iowa, it is a permit to carry a weapon. In most states, it's a permit to carry a concealed handgun. And when you travel, we'll get into the reciprocity in a minute, but if you
Yep.
recognition, if you travel to another state, you need to be aware and understand their laws and comply with their laws. You can't just go with Iowa laws.
Yep.
The permit to carry will allow you to first bypass a background check. You've had a background check when you got the permit to carry, and it's good for 5 years. So when you go to the federally licensed firearm dealer to buy a gun, you don't have to do the instant check, which may not be so instant anymore because of the backlog or the heavy demands on the system. So you can bypass that. That's one reason. Another reason is that you can carry in other states. I think it's around 32 other states. It varies
Yep.
a little from year to year.
I keep a little app on my phone so that I know,
Sure.
as I cross borders, you know, what I can and can't do.
Handgunlaw.us is a great
Exactly.
and reliable resource
Yep.
for learning what the laws are in other states and which states will honor your permit. But go beyond that. Not only honor your permit, look through there. They've got it very well organized for easy scanning to see what the real differences in the law are in these other states. So that's another reason. So you can carry in other states. The third reason is to, if you want to have a private purchase of a firearm. Permit's not required for private purchase. It was until July 1st for transfer of a handgun, but it is no longer for either a handgun or a long gun. However, most strangers are not going to be willing to transfer or sell you a firearm unless if they know you, or if you're highly recommended by somebody they know and trust. But more likely, they're going to want to see some evidence you're a person of good character, and that's what a permit is. It's evidence of good character. The fourth and final reason, and I think is the biggest one in a practical sense, is the Federal Gun-Free School Zones Act makes it a crime to carry your gun unless it's unloaded and in a locked container in public on public property within 1,000 feet of the boundary of a school, any school, public or private school. If you don't know it's a school zone, that's an out under the law. So if you're traveling in a strange place, maybe you get away with that in the court. But if it's in your town or your neighborhood, you're not gonna be able to tell a judge, honest judge, I didn't notice that school that was built 30 years ago and I've lived here 20, that was there. And so another out is if you have a permit to carry a weapon issued by the state in which the school is located. That's an out. And so now Iowa law, you can't carry your gun onto the school property, but you can go up to the school property line. But under federal law, that would be a felony within 1,000 feet of the property line. You might not even know the school's there. It might be over on the next street over. You won't see it. That's important. So you don't want to mess around with the possibility of a federal felony. People aren't getting picked up on this, but if you fall afoul of the law some other way, it could be an additional charge. We need to change that federal law, the Gun-Free School Zones Act, but that's not going to happen right away.
Right.
So that's a great reason to get a permit and keep a permit.
So the Second Amendment sanctuary is a big thing. Now we have all these counties in Iowa. Hey, we're Second Amendment sanctuary, and I think that's great. But what force of law does that actually have? What is besides a feel good? What is that doing for anybody now compared to what we're trying to do with changing the Constitution?
Well, John, to be honest with you, for the most part, these county resolutions are symbolic, but symbology is important. Yes. What do I have behind me? I've got 3 important symbols right there. Symbology is important. What they're saying is, well, first of all, you have to understand that federal law, the federal jurisprudence, the courts have said that the federal government cannot commandeer state and local resources, the authority of a local government, the money of a local government, the personnel of a local government to enforce a federal law. And so these resolutions that say we are not going to enforce what we view as any new and unconstitutional anti-Second Amendment violating or Second Amendment violating rules, regulations, edicts. We're not going to allow our county to be involved in enforcing that. That has the force of law if they hold up onto it. I don't envision that most sheriffs are going to go out and post deputies at the county line and say we're not going to allow ATF or FBI or federal marshals in here. I don't see that happening. So in some senses, it's symbolic, but it's important. And as we've gotten more than half the counties in Iowa, no, that's not right, but we've got more than a quarter of the counties in Iowa so far have joined this movement. That is a signal to our legislators and to our governor that we'd like to maybe take something a little more affirmative at the state level that would have a little more power.
What can citizens of these counties do? For instance, I mentioned something on Facebook about Greene County, where I spend a majority of my time during the non-freezing season. And the sheriff agrees, the DA approved, but if the rest of the county officials aren't on board, what kind of pressure can the citizens actually exert to get this sanctuary recognition?
Well, let's back up for a second. That's the great thing about what's been going on with Second Amendment sanctuaries is it's largely organic. IFC talked to folks in Jasper County early on because our former chairman, your predecessor, lives in Jasper County and is friends with one of the supervisors who pushed for this issue. We also talked to Hardin County, which was the second. Jasper County was first. Hardin County was second county this summer to adopt one of these resolutions. But for the most part, we find out about these counties doing this either after they've already adopted the resolution and we see a news report on it, or as it's in the works and somebody there in that county will contact us for advice on how to move it forward. But it's really an organic movement, and that's great. Now, if you go to iowafc.org and go to the top, there's a tab that's labeled Second Amendment Sanctuary, I believe, or 2A Sanctuary. And that has drop-down information, including, well, down on the page, a sample resolution that you can download. And all of these counties, to my knowledge, have adopted our language a couple of times with a couple of tweaks in it. And that's fine. We don't have any real pride of authorship there. It was just a sample that we put out over a year ago last summer. And they've taken this up. So you can go there and it discusses how to if you're an elected official, what you need to do, and if you're just a citizen, what you need to do, and basically present this issue to your county supervisor, maybe your county sheriff, possibly your county attorney, and talk with them about it and let them know your concerns, show them the sample resolution. Most counties, maybe all of them, I don't know, you as a citizen can put something on the agenda. It's probably better if you get a supervisor or 2 or 3 to put it on the agenda for you and take it up. Then call your like-minded friends and family and get them to contact your county supervisors. And then as many as possible show up on the day that it's discussed at the meeting. And you don't all have to talk, but
Right.
make a show of support, have a couple people that are well-spoken and talk about it. It's not as scary as you might imagine. And really, they've been going pretty smoothly. Only one county that I know of has actually voted it down, Blackhawk. You're not going to see this happen in Polk County or Story County or Johnson County anytime soon.
Right.
But really, it's moving pretty smoothly. And again, it's organic. So we'll provide you all the help you want. You can send a letter to info@iofc.org if you want help on this or any other issue, and we'll try to work. I mean, we're all volunteers, but we get a lot of requests here. How does this law work? Well, my cousin had a misdemeanor back years ago. Can he get a permit? All these
We're
sorts
glad
of
to
things.
have you to answer all those questions.
Well, yeah, I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, but I do spend a lot of time with my nose in the code book. I have to go back and review it frequently. So again, our group is about education and informing people so they can make good decisions, hopefully in line with what we believe. But we're all about letting people know the facts, right, John?
Yep, absolutely. The truth is what we deal in. Let's talk about the Freedom Amendment. When I got under the board, it sounded like this thing was rolling and we're set to go, but here we are now.
That doesn't show.
Yeah, with our automatic background, it's
doesn't
taken
show.
those out. But kind of explain, we had a little hiccup, but we're off and rolling again. It's been passed now by 2 consecutive sessions of the legislature, and now up for a vote in November. What? Go ahead.
Iowa Firearms Coalition realized early on, after we were formed from Iowa Carry, that Iowa doesn't have any protections for the right to keep bear arms in our Constitution. As I mentioned, we're one of only 6 states that doesn't. Some states have had such protections since their Constitution was originally drafted and adopted. Other states have adopted it as amendments in more recent years. Some of them quite recently, some, decades ago. In a couple of cases, like Louisiana, they had it in their Constitution and they adopted a new, stronger language and amended that to their Constitution. So we wanted to change that in Iowa. Remember, it's only been since 2010. Well, 2008, the Heller decision, Heller versus Washington decision, was that the court recognizes as a fundamental and individual right. It wasn't until 2010 that the court in McDonald versus Chicago said that it's a right that must be recognized and protected by the states and obviously then their political subdivisions.
Mm-hmm.
When the Bill of Rights was originally written, it didn't apply to the states. It applied to the federal. It's a limitation on the federal government. But after the Civil War and the adoption of the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, the courts have generally, they began to what they call incorporate these individual rights against the states. They say it's incorporated against the states. The states have to acknowledge these rights and protect them. It wasn't until 2010, 11 years ago, that they did this in the case of the Second Amendment. So when we started this, we were concerned that the rights weren't properly recognized under the federal Second Amendment, and we wanted that state level protection. Then we were concerned after 2010 that, well, the courts recognized this, but a lot of people, including Hillary Clinton when she ran for president, and subsequent candidates, said this decision was wrongly decided and we need to revisit it. And now they say, well, it doesn't look like we've got the votes to revisit it. Let's pack the court with people to vote our way, and we'll reverse that. So were that to happen, were in any way the federal government not to properly recognize the Second Amendment, it would be important to have it at the state level. At the very least, it'll be absolute protection against the state infringing on these rights. So we started in 2011 to do this, and the House adopted a a version of what we now call the Freedom Amendment. It didn't go anywhere in the Senate, and for several years we couldn't move it because of obstruction by the party that controlled the Senate. But then we got it through the House and the Senate, and the way an amendment works in Iowa is you have to pass it through a General Assembly, which is one of the two years. There's 2 sessions in a General Assembly. Then have an election and elect new senators and representatives. Then pass the exact same language again through both the House and the Senate. And then it will go to a vote of the people. Well, unfortunately, the arcane and obscure method of publication that was designed back when all we had was newspapers back in the 1800s.
Right.
It didn't get properly publicized during that election period. And we learned that the first year was just a practice round. So we passed it to the House and Senate again, had an election, passed it to the House and Senate again this year, and now it is on the ballot in 2022, November 2022, and we need 50% of the vote plus 1 vote. But we want to have a 2/3 majority,
Right,
say,
overwhelming.
win, greater, pass this amendment. This amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The sovereign state of Iowa affirms and recognizes this right to be a fundamental individual right. Any and all restrictions of this right shall be subject to strict scrutiny. That's it in its entirety. People ask, well, why didn't you just use the language of the Second Amendment? Well, it's because those people who, by the way, the people that ask this are people who oppose this. The people who oppose enforcement or allowing us to exercise our Second Amendment rights, our right to keep bear arms, have tried for 100 years or more to get around the plain language of the Second Amendment.
Right.
And we've learned from that. We're just not going to we're not going to make the same mistake twice. So this says it shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment says that. It says we recognize it to be that the Iowa recognizes it to be a fundamental individual right. The United States Supreme Court recognized that, but not till 2008. And finally, any and all restrictions of this right shall be subject to strict scrutiny. And what that means is that if there's a law, a regulation, an edict that appears to impinge on the free exercise of the right to keep and bear arms, that a court, when this is challenged, a court will have to judge this based on the highest level of judicial scrutiny. This is a construct of the courts over many decades that they have 3 levels of scrutiny. One is to assume that a law has a reasonable basis and there's hardly any bar to cross
Right.
to win that. There's intermediate scrutiny, and then there's strict scrutiny. Under strict scrutiny, it's very difficult, and strict scrutiny is the test that should be offered to all fundamental rights.
Mm-hmm.
And it typically is, except that it hasn't been in the case of Second Amendment rights. There, as Clarence Thomas says, we can't have the Second Amendment be a second-class right.
Right.
It's a fundamental right. And so under strict scrutiny, the government has to show that they have a great need, I can't remember the word, but that there's a very strong need for the government to regulate in this area, and that this regulation is the least restrictive way possible of doing that. And the combination of that makes it almost impossible to restrict a fundamental right. And so we want that language in there. And it doesn't mean we didn't put it in there to make it easier to restrict this right. We made it put it in there to make it harder.
That sounds good. And this again doesn't overrule the federal government, but if they came to Iowa, it would be like, okay, you can't use our National Guard, you can't use our sheriff's departments, you can't use our police departments to infringe on our rights. Is that correct?
Sure. This goes back to the Second Amendment sanctuary thing a little bit, in that Iowa, if we declare ourselves a sanctuary state, can't really prevent federal officials from coming in and trying to enforce a federal rule, but we don't have to assist in it. And to be honest with you, John, the federal government doesn't have the manpower to enforce every rule. How many rules are there? My God, there's a book out there, 5 felonies a day, that we all commit felonies a day and we don't even know it. So they can't come in and enforce their laws. They could make an example out of somebody, send in ATF, FBI, federal marshals, but they really rely on state and local law enforcement to enforce laws. And so there is that aspect of it. But also this would mean that the state could not easily pass a rule that would regulate in this area. And that's the way it ought to be. When we went to permitless carry this year, and there was more to that law, by the way, that went into effect on July 1st, but we have sort of righted the ship, and things were upside down, where we supposedly have a right, but we had to go to the state or the county, representing the state, and ask permission. Even under shall issue, there was still a requirement there to go through this procedure to get permission to exercise your right. And now the state recognizes the right and says, well, I don't care what you do as long as you're peaceful and law abiding otherwise. So if you are under the new law, if you are in lawful possession of a weapon, you can carry that on or about your person, openly or concealed, or in a vehicle. You don't have to have a permit, but of course you have to abide by other laws. You don't assault people with it. You don't threaten people with it. Whatever. But that's the way it ought to be, that the government has to really show a strong reason to interfere with the free exercise of your fundamental rights.
Well, we sure appreciate what you've done. Literally countless hours. If you were an attorney, you'd be a multimillionaire, but since you're not, you're just one of the rest of us. So we sure appreciate you, your effort, your heart for liberty, and just encourage other folks that if you're kind of wired up like we are, we sure could use you as volunteers, as members, as we really make a strong push, because I can assure you, as we move into 2022, there will be a lot of opposition, the majority from out of the state of Iowa against this. Am I correct?
Absolutely. That over the next year, we're going to have very powerful anti-liberty forces from outside the state pouring probably more than $1 million, probably multiple millions into this fight against our Freedom Amendment. We are just volunteers. We're trying to raise money to fight against it, but we're going to have to use an organic method. So we need your memberships. We need your paid memberships, frankly. We get by on very little money normally, but we need money. And IFCPAC.org. IFCPAC.org is our political action committee, and that's really where we need funds right now for this battle that we'll be engaging in over the next year.
All right, Richard Rogers, our guest today on Warrior Wednesday. Join IFC, join the pack, help us out as we fight for freedom in Iowa all the way through 2022 and beyond.